When it comes to blisteringly frantic, arcade-style action, the Apple II family of computers is certainly not what comes to mind for many players. Though it certainly has a fine reputation for gaming that was earned not from arcade-style experiences, but rather its great library of role-playing games alongside educational experiences and plenty of other unique gems. It doesn't mean that it can't handle the challenges of a good shooter though, as Snacky God Software's latest release, Darkstar Unhinged, goes to show. This is Beyond the Scanlines, a series focusing on interesting games on classic computing and gaming platforms. Darkstar Unhinged puts you in the flight suit of Deuce Darkstar, an intergalactic hero who has saved many an alien race from evil, hideous galactic threats. Now, being a hero may be noble and should be enough to pay the bills, right? Not in Deuce's case. The species he's saved haven't quite paid their bills, and it's gotten to the point that he's gotten quite ticked off about it. Now, he's out for revenge, blasting his way through the races which he once swore to protect. And so, the game begins, with Deuce on a 10-level mission in which he just simply needs to blast every darn alien which moves. Each of these levels is broken up into 8 stages, and they initially open with you flying through a gauntlet of enemy defences. At first, the threats you'll face, they'll typically be enemies flying solo, or maybe in pairs. Progressing to later stages in a level, and enemy attacks will ramp up, attacking in larger, more complex formations. Combine with the enemies which seek you out from the upper and lower sections, and you'll seriously need to pull off some tight movements to avoid crashing into them. While most shooters put you in a craft with the ability to upgrade its speed, or perhaps just start out at a decent flight speed, you'll find that here, your movements tend to be somewhat slower in comparison. And this kind of ties into its control scheme. Like many games for the Apple II family, you have options for both joystick and keyboard controls. I have to just get it out of the way now. I am absolutely not a fan of the keyboard controls, which comes down to 2 reasons. Firstly, it's the hardware itself. The Apple II can only handle input from a single key at a time. So for an action game like this, you'll find you have to hit a key to start moving in a direction, then hit it again to stop. What this also means is that you can only move or fire, but you can't do both at the same time. Whilst the slower pace of the gameplay doesn't impact this too much, I find it gets a little confusing on the inputs at points. The second reason I'm not a fan of these controls is from the key layout. It's very inspired by the arcade version of Defender, with controls for applying thrust, using your weapons, and changing direction, all mapped to your left hand. Moving the ship both vertically and horizontally is done using a set of keys mapped to your right hand. Now, adapting to these is certainly dependent on how you fare with those Defender controls. There's certainly a setup I've never really mastered, and it's probably why I prefer many of its home ports. On the other hand, the joystick controls here feel far more natural, even with the Apple II featuring analog joysticks compared to its rivals which use traditional digital ones. These controls feel so much nicer in the hand, and it's primarily because you're able to move both your fighter and fire your ship's guns at the same time. This is something which shooters really need in order to feel solid and responsive, and keep you in the game for far longer periods of time. Talking about firepower, a Deuce's fighter is armed with a single, front-firing laser cannon. Collecting the L pickups you'll see will allow you to upgrade it. This can be done 4 times, with its final upgrade doing 4 times the damage of the original base shot. On the easier levels, these upgrades are more of a nice to have over an absolute requirement. When you get further into the game, or choose a tougher difficulty level, it's a whole other story, as enemies will start to require multiple hits to dispatch. When you have collected that 4th level of firepower, the next pickup you get will give you the mighty Death Orb. This orbits your craft and augments your firepower with a secondary shot, one which can even be fired backwards with the right timing. Besides these weapon upgrade pickups, you'll also have pickups which can offer you extra lives and also replenish your shields. One thing I find really interesting is the way these are prioritised. When you're down to your last life, you'll start seeing the pickups available for extra lives, but only until you nab one and then have a single life remaining. If you've been hit by enemy fire and taken damage to your shields, then the pickup will appear which restores them back to full power. The way this is done is a great way to make the game enjoyable by more than a traditional shooter crowd, and I truly feel this makes the game far more friendlier as a result. Another way in which the game tries to be friendly to players is through the continue system. Not only does the game provide unlimited continues, but you aren't penalised for using them. Your score isn't reset back to 0, and you'll be placed at the start of the current stage you're on when using one. Once you've cleared the 8th stage of a level, it's time to face one of the enemy bosses. Though they require some skill to take down, they're generally not as hectic as what you'll find in shooters for newer platforms. You certainly won't find them overwhelming to defeat, and nor will the Apple II to handle them. After they've been blown away, it's on to the next level to do it all again. One thing I love is that you'll always have an obstacle to master as part of the first challenge. From the gate on level 1 to the tunnel in level 3, these shake up the mechanics just enough to keep you engaged on Deuce's quest as you get further and further in. Another mechanic I love is how your power-ups can be shot. Not in a shoot them to change what they do sense, but rather a shoot them and they'll be destroyed one. You don't see this in many shooters, and I think it's a great fit here thanks to the reduced elements on screen. It means you have to be careful when one spawns, because they'll home in on your position. Thankfully, with the reduced numbers of enemies present, blasting one isn't too great a penalty, as you can still fight your way through the game without too much extra challenge. It certainly is unlike other blasters in that regard. From a presentation angle, you have quite a few settings on offer, starting with an assortment of difficulty levels. These will impact how challenging the enemies will be, requiring more hits to take them out on the higher levels. As highlighted earlier, you've got the choice between the keyboard and joystick for controls, the former sadly being locked to that Defender-style layout, without an ability to redefine them. This, of course, really is only an issue if you don't have a joystick connected. Interestingly, is the ability to load in an expansion disc. These aren't available at launch, but will provide new level sets and enemy types when they're released in the future. I don't think I've ever seen a shooter include such a feature before, and I can't wait to see just how it gets utilised as they do get released. Visually, Darkstar Unleashed aims very much for that classic Apple II aesthetic. From its black background, the combinations of green and purple alongside orange and blue used for the enemy and pickup sprites. Everything you see on screen is well defined and easy to spot. You're not going to be losing lives here thanks to bullets being lost amongst the visuals, for that matter. When things do get hectic, you'll find there is some slowdown, which, to be frank, isn't a surprise, knowing the Apple II family is not equipped with the sprite and graphic capabilities its peers have. That being said, it doesn't really get in the way of one's enjoyment, as you're always going to be able to respond to inputs, and it's clearer visuals over lots of flicker, which helps really keep an eye on things. The sound effects are a bit of a different story. They use the stock Apple II speaker hardware, and it really features nothing more than simple bleeps, clicks for explosions, and whatnot. It does the job, considering the limitations of the machine, but ultimately, it's what you would expect. A little surprise is that when starting the game, you do get that opening speech sample.
Greetings, this is Darkstar, destroyer of worlds. You're next.
It's a neat touch, and the kind of thing I've not really seen all that much on the Apple II platform. Darkstar Unhinged is certainly the kind of shooter that probably isn't for everyone. I've had a seriously fun time blasting my way through it, and it's been a great improvement on the prior releases by snacking on software. It's feeling far more polished and far more approachable making it a game which can be picked up and enjoyed by anyone, not just those who revel in the challenge provided by arcade-style games released in the early 80s. If your shooter tastes tend towards games which have to run at a blistering 50 or 60 frames per second, or hurl ridiculous numbers of bullets about on screen, or feature lots of giant enemies, this one is probably not going to sway you into checking it out. That being said, I like to believe Beyond the Scanlines serves as inspiration to go beyond the system or two you're most nostalgic for, to check out and play games released on them, to see what lies beyond the norm and maybe, just maybe, get hooked on another platform indeed. All of that is kind of why I feel you should certainly give it a play regardless. Darkstar Unhinged is compatible with just about every Apple II model out there, as long as it's got 48K RAM installed. Whether it's an original Apple II from 1977 to later machines like the Apple II GS or even the Apple III or perhaps even the Apple IIe card released for the early 90s Macintosh, it's going to run just fine on all of them. Getting a copy of Darkstar Unhinged is quite straightforward. Head on over to the Snacking on Software website where for just $20 plus postage, you can get your own physical copy on a 5¼ disc in a baggie, just like in the early days of the Apple II. It's the perfect touch to make this release feel right at home amongst those gems from the early years of the platform. For those who lack the original hardware, the disc image itself is available to enjoy under emulation, and that can serve as a fine substitute if you need it. Which brings me to the end of yet another Beyond the Scanlines. If you appreciated this look back at an interesting gem, why not leave a thumbs up on the video? Got some thoughts? Drop me a comment and let's chat. If you haven't already, do consider subscribing to the channel, and yes, ringing the bell to be notified the moment new videos are uploaded. Most importantly, thank you all so very much for watching.